Kathy Lin, Head of Maths, Stacey Martin, Head of Science, both here at Edrolo. You've been looking at the Edrolo data to try to understand what contributes to high-performing students, including recently presenting at Research Ed at Ballarat Clarendon College. What prompted this and what were you hoping to answer?
So this was prompted by something we know as teachers. We know top performers in our class, we can recognise them. And while we encourage all students to make progress through resources, study habits, checks for understanding, correcting misconceptions, adapting our teaching and providing feedback, we really wanted to dig into the behaviour of a top performer. Edrolo is a learning system, and we hypothesised that top performing schools, classes and students would engage with our platform in a unique way, and that these behaviours set them up for success. So to test this, we dug into the data to see if our hypothesis was supported and to uncover which behaviours drive top performance for schools, classes and teachers.
So I don't want to spoil the reveal and the deeper analysis, but what are the top line findings? What did you find from this?
And so our analysis confirmed that distinct behaviours do play an important role in driving up results. The reason this matters, I guess, is because if we know what top performers are doing, then we can identify the behaviours that contribute to success and help more students, teachers and schools adopt them. So by uncovering these patterns, we can provide targeted support, refine our resources and empower educators to drive meaningful improvements in student learning outcomes.
Nice. Of course, it's what we're all working towards. Right? Tell us a little bit about the data set that you've been looking at, because I think it's really important to bring credibility to what people are hearing.
Yeah, so I'll talk about the numbers since I'm head of math. But yeah, we had a pretty large data set. So we tracked all of our events on the Edrolo platform. So we've been around for 10 years. We had a lot of data. But we really zoomed in and looked at the VCE in Victoria, which is the Victoria certificate that they get in year 11 and 12 for completing the senior courses. And we looked at them because they actually there's an external benchmark, the VC honor roll. So we can actually compare our internal data with what's out there with top performers. We tracked these events on our platform and we had a lot. We had over 40 million videos that were watched on our platform, which was amazing. And we tracked over 1.8 million assessment question responses. And what was really astonishing is we had over 14 million practice question responses. So it was a pretty large data set that we could zoom in and look at. So we can tell you a little bit about the VC as well of what we were looking at for top performers. So for a top performer, we looked at students who were over 40 plus. So the VC score, in case anyone's not familiar, is a score out of 50. And if you get 40 and above, it puts you in about the top 8% of your class. As I said before, the VC prints this honor roll that's public. We can all compare like what the top schools are. So we were able to use that. There are some limitations to our data. There are 15% of students who do score 40 and above. They actually can choose not to report their scores. So that's not included. And also, we were also looking at for top performers in some schools, they may choose to do an IB program instead of the VCE. So they're actually not included in that as well.
For people listening that may not be aware of the Edrolo system, you've touched on questions and videos. What are the different content types that students can interact with that are providing you with this data?
Yeah, so of all the data we collected, we focused on 3 main content types because these are the most consistent across all 16 subjects that Edrolo offers at VCE, and they're the most widely used. So the first of these is our practice questions. These are available for every topic. They're available 24/7, hundreds per topic. So there's a focus on skill building, factual recall, and exam style questions. These have fully worked solutions, so as soon as students submit their answers, they'll get instant feedback for those. The second content type is exam style questions, and these are designed to mimic a VCE exam situation. So teachers can control access, they can lock and release at different times and get that more high stakes environment. The answers for these are only visible after a full submission. And the third type is our videos. So these are delivered by our expert teachers that explain key concepts aligned with the VCE study design. Again, these are available 24/7, so students can watch anytime for revision and clarification, morning, noon, and night.
Beautiful. Thank you for the clarification. Let's get into the finding now. We touched on a super high level, but what did you find? I know you've looked at different levels. What did you find at, say, the school level? What are you seeing as the patterns across the school?
Yeah, so we looked at 497 schools in Victoria. And before you think that might not be like a good representation of top performers, actually it's pretty good in that 97% of the top performing schools use Edrolo. So they were in our cohort. And actually also 90.4% of students we found that had 40 plus also use Edrolo. So this is what we looked at the school level. What we found at the school level actually was that there was no real positive correlation of like any behavior that a particular school or type of school is doing that's really affecting these top performers, which was actually kind of great to see, in that it really doesn't matter the type of school that you're going to. So whether it's government or independent or Catholic, that isn't really what's affecting these top performers. So when at first we were just seeing, okay, like, is it the type of school you're going to? Does it affect how many videos you're watching or questions you're answering? And it didn't really show that. We went in to look at, like, is it like affecting accuracy, which was sort of showing that there was a bit of, obviously top performers are having a bit of a higher accuracy rate, but it really wasn't clear at the school level. So we thought, okay, so maybe we need to dive into more like the other layers to see if something more specific is happening. Because at the school level, there's a lot of other factors. Departments, there's different subjects, it could be teacher specific. So there's a lot of other factors that could be affecting.
Which is super interesting, right? Because I know a lot of John Hattie's research talks about the fact that there's a lot more variation within a school than there is between schools. So it sounds like you're seeing something similar. So then to that point, what did you see happening within, say, classes within a school? Where did you start to find the things that were more interesting?
Yeah, so we dived into to look at classes, and that was really, really interesting, because we had actually over 8,000 student responses, and then we actually had over like 140,000 enrollments in Edrolo. So basically, it's about like 2 to 3 subjects that each student was enrolled in an Edrolo subject. What was interesting to see first was that the number of videos that were watched, the numbers of videos viewed between a top performing class, and we just made a benchmark of top performing class was the higher percentage of having the highest percentage of 40 plus students. If we want to dig into the data, basically we made a sort of a baseline of you had to have 10 students enrolled in your class. Obviously this, if you had less, like, could skew the data. So we looked at those classes. And what we saw on the video level is that actually there was really no difference between the top performers and the others in the amount of videos that they watched. So that was really interesting. And also, again, really good to see that it wasn't those teacher theory videos that Stacey talked about before. That's not really affecting their results. So it's really not replacing the teacher in the classroom. So the videos being watched is more of like sort of like a passive learning, maybe for consolidation or just understanding. But obviously the teacher and what's happening in the classroom is probably having more effect. And we actually did see that when we looked into teacher behavior. So with teacher behavior, we saw that teachers who assign questions and are checking the results of their questions are having a larger effect on the performance of the students. So that was great to see that these teachers who are engaging their students and following up with them, providing feedback, being accountable, that is having an effect. And the other great thing that we noticed and that we saw is that there was a really big difference between top performing students and the number of questions that they were answering to others. So there was a bigger, obviously bigger percentage of students who answered practice questions, but we saw an even larger difference in answering assessment style questions. So as Stacey mentioned before, there's practice questions and assessment questions. So these exam style practice questions were really having a good effect on students. So we did see this at the class level, but it also started to make us think, like, we think that the biggest difference is really happening at the student level.
Can you give me here, Kathy, the headline stats? I'm not a maths teacher. I struggle sometimes with the numbers. What was the research, the body of data that you were looking at to establish this research?
Yeah, so we actually looked at over 58,000 student responses, students that were engaging with the platform. And there's about 140,000 enrollments. So at Edrolo, it's one student per subject is an enrollment. So it's about probably 2 to 3 Edrolo subjects per student. And there were over 8,000 teachers that were active. So that's what we looked at. And with that, there were over 40 million videos watched and over 1.8 million assessment questions that were answered. But practice questions, there were over 14 million practice question responses. So it was really, really big. And we looked at over 497 schools. And at Edrolo, we offer 16 subjects for those schools.
A massive data set. It's almost a small country, I think. Like, there's so much there to look at. I don't know how you dealt with that data. Do you want to expand on the student part of it then? What did you see at that level?
Yeah, so this is exciting. So we had our top performers, so those who achieved 40 plus, and they made up 6.5% of our total enrollments on the platform. But when we looked at those assessment questions, they actually answered 12.7%. So they completed nearly twice as many questions as their peers. And so we noted that while top performers are watching approximately 10% more video content, the actual key differentiator was answering 29% more exam style questions and 8.8% more practice questions across a year.
It makes complete sense, right? Like, they're doing the kind of work that is ultimately going to be what they're examined on, and they're getting into that habit of seeing those kind of questions and being able to respond to them. You're both teachers. What are the implications for teachers? What would you be doing if you were in the classroom with this information?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, creating that accountability and the feedback loop, like I think anyone who has worked with teenagers or has teenagers, I'm also a parent to teenagers, knows that if you don't check up on them, they're probably not going to do it. So really not only just setting active revision of trying, doing these practice questions or practicing the assessment style questions. I know at my son's school, they actually call it a dress rehearsal, which I love. Like, they're always saying, this is your dress rehearsal. You're starting to study for an exam in January that you're going to take in November. So for teachers, I think it's really important to know what you're assigning, maybe assigning for homework, assigning as tasks, practice questions, assessment style questions, and then also creating that feedback loop. So checking up on them. I know, like, if you have 5 classes of 20 plus kids, it can be really difficult, but really setting aside, a system of where that you are giving them the feedback. Where are they falling down? What should they be studying now? And really just coaching them along the way in this journey to the end.
For you, Stacey?
Yeah, much the same. I think I've marked VCE biology papers in the past, and I've read comments on exam responses where students have written things like, I know the content, but I don't know how to answer this. And so I think it becomes really important in teaching exam technique. And so having the ability to have so many questions available for students to continuously craft that technique, being exposed to the command terms, checking for mark allocation, and then getting that feedback so that they can check their answers and then course correct if needed. I think developing a culture of continuous improvement is really important. So our data showed that accuracy had a lot to do with top performers as well. So using that data to, set your tasks and then setting accuracy benchmarks before students move on so that they kind of persist with these challenging topics and really get the mastery before they move on as well. And then finally, normalizing mistakes as part of the learning process and encouraging students to persist with those topics.
I love that persistence and depth, and then also just that consistency and spacing it out, as you said, Kathy, the dress rehearsal. I love that as well. Like, starting now, doing that deliberate practice regularly, having those benchmarks around accuracy is just going to keep students on track. Like, it's like my watch pinging me to get up and move, right? Like, you have that kind of regular habit forming process.
Yeah. And it's actually that you brought that up, Stacey. My son just had a psychology stack in year 12 day before yesterday, and he said the exact same thing. And I think it's amazing about the content. He knew the content back to front, had done all the flashcards, was very confident, and then he got hung up on the stimulus and how to answer the question. And what's great is that it's, March, so he has time to practice it, but being able to practice that is so important. And yeah, it happened in real life.
Yeah, it's certainly a skill in itself, I think. You know the content, but to be able to actually phrase it and correctly structure your response, that's certainly a skill.
And that's what we're seeing through this data of what students are practicing from the sounds of it. And as you said, as a teacher point of view, being able to set that up and support students into that habit sounds like it's a really kind of important part of setting them up for success, which is what a lot of teachers do.
Absolutely.
Can we talk now about takeaways for students from this? Like, it's going to be really, I think, important message both for students, but I think teachers will be interested as well, again, in how they can support their students.
Yeah, so we saw that our top performing students were consistently answering more questions across the year, and that they maintained an accuracy of about 80% throughout the year as well, which was 10% above their peers. So when we looked at this on a heat map, we were able to see the terms across the bottom and then the chapters that they have in a course, and look at how many questions they were answering at each point across the year. And I think what was really interesting is that the top performers had a really consistent approach. It showed that they did answer more questions throughout the year, whereas those that achieved below 40, they dropped off. They started promising, but pretty soon they were not answering the same volume of questions. They also tended to lack a certain structure that we saw with those that achieved the 40s. So with the 40 plus students, it looked like they were covering a topic in class, answering as many questions as they could, achieving that 80% accuracy, that mastery of the content, and then moving on. And they did this consistently throughout the year. And then when it came time before the exam, they could go back, they could cover off anything that they sort of needed to in terms of spaced retrieval. And they already had such strong understanding of it already that then they obviously did well in their exam. So yeah, it was really interesting to see that cramming is not the way forward. It really is that consistent approach.
What their teachers have been saying for years, right?
That's it, yeah. But it was amazing to see it sort of lit up in a heat map.
And such a good message as well there in terms of, again, that persistent, regular practice and not, as you said, not leaving it to the last minute and really planning out your study and revision, but also not kind of pushing through where there might be gaps thinking, oh, I'll fix this later, because it compounds from the sound of it over the years. So good message, I think, for students. To finish up, what is the next phase of research, or what's coming next in this space?
Yeah, so I think we want to help more students adopt high performance behaviours at scale. So we know that teacher involvement impacts student engagement, and that engagement and practice are linked to performance. But the challenge is, how do we elicit these high performance behaviours across an entire cohort and not just for the motivated few? So at Edrolo, we see this solving for this as a real opportunity. And then, of course, we want to continue to partner with teachers and refine our approach, because as our data shows, teacher-driven intervention makes a really big difference in student outcomes.
Good to know. Thank you for the chat today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Stacey.